Hello, during today's session, you are going to learn about Elif and Else statements. So let's start sharing the screen and let's go to the Python. Once that we are here on the Python, let's take this suggestion, which says, first watch the if statement video. So the reason why I'm suggesting this is because there is relevant dependency among Elif, else, and if statements. So if you understand how if statement works, it will make easier for you to understand when and how to implement the elif and else conditions. Seeing this, let's start with the quick if recap, and let's just remember that we have already explained that the if condition is based on whether the condition is true or false. Also, it has been explained that that if the if condition is true, it brings out its expression. That means all the lines that needs to be executed after our condition. And finally, if the if condition is false, then it's just required to ignore the block lines or everything that needs to be executed, which is below the condition. So saying this, let's go to the syntax. And for that, we are seeing that our if condition syntax is composed of the if keyword, our condition colon, and then the block or statement to execute if the condition is true. Remember that the rule is that the if condition works when the condition is true. If this is false, we're not going to execute any line below the condition. So let's go to work in one example, just in order to clarify the previous lines mentioned. So let's go for the first example. It's here we have created our global variables. We have number 1 and number 2, and we assign 20 integer value and 400 integer value respectively. So for that, we have as per our syntax, the if keyword. Remember, we have the if keyword and then our condition. So let's go to the condition. If number 2, 400 is greater than number 1, 20, then we print number 2 is greater than number 1, right? So let's run it. Let's see here, number 2 is greater than number 1. So that's true. But if, for example, if we would love to change the 20 by 500, in that case, we would make false our condition. So let's see. As per you can see here, we don't have this comment. Number 2 is greater than number 1. We don't have this comment more, not displayed in the console. Because this condition is not true, because number 2, 400, is not greater than 500, right? Because we changed the value. So let's just go back to our initial value, 20. Now let's review it, and here we have once more our comment. Number 2 is greater than number 1 because actually the 400 that correspond to the number 2 are greater than the 20. So that's correct. Now let's talk about elif and else conditions. For the elif keyword in Python, we have a way to say if the previous condition were not true, then try this next condition. So let's work in one example just to clarify this sentence. So here we have number 1 equal to 20, number 2 equal to 20. Here, if number 2 is greater than number 1, let's see. Number 2, 20 is greater than number 1. Well, it's not true. But as per you could remember, the if was just validating if this is true or false. If this is true, I execute next line. If this is false, I just skip it and I finish, right? But with when we implement the elif, we're given a second chance or a second condition when the if is false. That means if number 2, 20 is not greater than number 1, 20, well, in that case, we pass just to the next validation, to the next condition. Elif says, if this not, then if number 1 equal to number 2, which is true, then print number 1 and number 2 are equal. Let's see, number 1 and number 2 are equal. We have it. So let's continue. Here, for the next line, we're saying the else keyword catches anything which isn't caught by the preceding conditions. So seeing this, we have number 1, 90, number 2, 20, and let's go to the condition. If number 2, in this case 20, it's greater than number 1, 90, we print this line. But we're seeing that 20 is not greater than 90, right? So we just keep that simple and we just skip to the next. Elif, so if this is not true, then if number 1 equal to number 2, which is not true, 90 is not equal to 20, well, what happened in that time? In that time, we just continue with the last option. So remember, the else is going to catch anything which isn't caught by the preceding condition. As per this was false and was not execute, and this was false, was not execute. Well, we continue with else, which says print number 1 is greater than number 2. So we receive that. Number 1 is greater than number 2. And this is how else works. Now, we can also have else without elif. That's mean, in order to use the else, it's not required to use elif after the if. Here we have this sequence. We have if, elif, else, but we can have also if, else. So let's see one example. We have number 1 equal to 80, number 2 equal to 12. So let's go to the if validation. So if number 2, 12 is greater than 80, number 1 is not true. So let's go to the next. Well, that was false. So let's go to the next, else, print. Number 2 is not greater than number 1. Number 2 is not greater than number 1. So saying this, let's go to one shorthand if, which is a shorter way to use of our if condition. And it says, if we have only one statement to execute, we can put it on the same line as the if statement. So what it says is that instead to use one line to type our condition, use colon, and then use other line to type our print, let's just keep everything in one line. So here we have, if number 1 is greater than number 2, well, in that case, just print number 1 is greater than number 2. And here we have number 1 is greater than number 2. Now let's see one shorthand for the if-else statement. For that, we have the next line. If we have only one statement to execute, one for if and one for else, we can put it all on the same line. So once more, we're going to reduce the lines that we can't use just in order to type the if, but in this case, it's the if and the else. So let's go with our number 1 variables equal to 2, number 2 equal to 330. So let's start. As per you can see here, we start with the printing this time. So print one number string. If number 1, if 2 is greater than number 2, 330, which is not true, else print 2. So due to the same, we should see printed or displayed in the console the number 2. Here we have. Now let's go to the ternary operators or conditional expressions. For that, we have that we can also have multiple else statements on the same line. Once more, we are going to try to use the minimum lines to work with our conditions. So we have number 1 equal to 330 and number 2, the same integer value, 330. For that, we are starting with print one number. If number 1, 330, it's bigger than number 2, 330. Else, print equal if number 1 equal to number 2. Here we have number 1, 330, and number 2, 330. So this is the true. And the last set, else, if this was false and this was false, well, the last condition will be else, print true. So we are going to reflect this, the equal, because the equal was the one, the else, that covered or make true this condition, because these two numbers are equal, right? Once more, remember, we start with the print, and then we said that we are going to print this, but just if this number is bigger or is greater than this number, else we print this equal, but just if number 1 is equal to number 2, else print 2. That's why we print equal. Those are equals. Now, we are going to talk about the AND operator. So the AND keyword is a logical operator and is used to combine conditional statements. So for this, we have that we're going to test if number 1 is greater than number 2, and if number 3 is greater than number 1. Let's start with the variables. We have variable 1, 200, variable 2, or number 2 equal to 33, and variable 3, number 3 equal to 400. For that, let's start with the validation. We have if condition. If number 1, 200 is greater than number 2, 33, that's true. If and number 3, it's 400 is greater than number 1, it's 200. That's sorry, my cat. If number 3 is 400 is greater than number 1, in this case 200, that's true too, then we print both conditions are true. So remember the rule to make work this condition when we use the AND operator is that to make true the whole condition is required that this first validation will be correct and this validation will be correct. So this is correct and this is correct. So we print both conditions are true. Both conditions are true. Now let's continue with other operator. In this case, we're going to talk about the OR. So the OR keyword is a logical operator and is used to combine conditional statements. So saying this, we have the next example that says that is required to test if number 1 is greater than number 2, or if number 1 is greater than number 3. So for that, we have the 3 variables. The first is equal to 200, number 2 equal to 33, and number 3 equal to 500. So let's start. If number 1, 200 is greater than number 2, 33, that's true. Or number 1, 200 is greater than number 3, 500. Well, that's not true, that is false. Then we print that. So if you can see the difference with AND, we require that both conditions or subconditions will be true. Both conditions are true. But for that, if we have just one as true, because this is true, but this is false. If we have just one, with that is more than enough to print the line or execute the code. So for that reason, we will see display at least one of the conditions is true. At least one of the conditions is true, because we have or this. And remember, for this, it needs to be this and this. Okay. So let's continue with other topic called nested if. So for that, we have that we can have if statements inside the if statements, and this is called nested if statements. So let's see one example. We have our global variable, the a equal to 41 integer value. So if a 41 is greater than 20, we print above 10, right? This is true. And if a 41 is greater than 10, we print and also above 20. that is true. So we have this true and this true, and we should see first of all print this and print this. So when as per we have this condition as true, or at least one was initially true, then we should just ignore the else, because remember we use the else when this is false, and there is nothing else to validate. This was the last, okay? Now, once more, let's see our results above 10 and also above. In the case, remember that will be, for example, 5, which make false and false this. We will generate that the else statement will have acted and printed, but not above 20, right? So let's just keep as per we have it, 41, and let's run it. And keep our nested if, because we execute this true, and this is it. So we have above 10 and also above 20. So let's just finalize with the last statement. This is called the pass statement. And for that, we have that if statements cannot be, if statements cannot be empty, that means those kind of if and the condition cannot be empty. When we say that it's empty, that means that, for example, here, this is not empty because we have if, we have our condition, and then we have our block or line. We have block and we have block, right? But in this case, we're saying that this is empty because here, for example, we have if keyword, we have our condition, but we don't have nothing here below this, okay? So let's continue. So the if statements cannot be empty, but if you for some reason have an if statement without no content, put it on pass statements to avoid getting an error. That means if we use this statement, the pass statement, we're going to avoid to generate any error. So as per you can see, if number 2, 20 equal to number 1, 20, that's true, then we should do something here, right? But as per, for example, I really don't know what's going to happen after we confirm that that condition is true. Well, I just type pass. Let's just remove the pass to confirm what could happen if we will have left just empty. As where you can see here, we will receive that kind of error, which says indentation error, expected an indented block. See? So let's type once more pass. And as per you can see here, we have just catch that error or remove that error or avoid that error. So I think that this is it for today's video. Once more, remember the suggestion is watch the if statement video before start working with these Elif and Else statements. And if it's required, just give double check to the operators, and remember that on this video we cover the AND and the OR logical operators. And this is it. See you on next videos, and all the best on this weekend.